The Premier of British Columbia is issuing a plea to the Bank of Canada. In a letter to the bank's governor, Tiff Macklem, Premier David Eby writes, "People in BC are already hurting. In your role as governor, I urge you to consider the full human impact of rate increases and not further increase rates at this time. The increased financial strain, poverty, and homelessness will lead to significant economic and social damage to our province and the country that will take years to repair." Now, the letter comes just six days, that is, before the bank makes its latest interest rate decision. Eby has also written to the Prime Minister, urging him to take a bigger role in bringing inflation under control. BC Premier David Eby joins me now from Richmond, BC. Premier, thank you for joining us. It is not every day that the leader of a province writes the Bank of Canada and the governor. But we know that these are not ordinary times. People right across this country are hurting from soaring interest rates. We talk about it every day on this program, on this network. Do you actually think, though, that this letter is going to make a substantial difference here?
Well, I feel I have an important role as the Premier of British Columbia, and that's to make sure the voice of British Columbians are heard in decisions that affect their lives. I was, to be blunt, I was really surprised to hear that the Bank of Canada was considering further interest rate increases at the September meeting, that was on the table, because I can tell you in British Columbia, people with car loans, tenants are seeing landlords that are refinancing try to pass costs through to them. Small businesses are seeing the same at the commercial level. People with mortgages, they're either locking in at much higher rates or they're seeing renewal dates come up that are going to have huge impacts on them. We're just seeing the beginning of the impact of this historic run-up in rates, and I can tell you it's devastating. And it's also shutting down badly needed rental housing construction in the province and the private sector, because the costs of builders are going up as they borrow money to finance the building before the tenants come in. It's just, you know, it's so critical that frontline information, I believe, gets to the governor. I recognize the independent role, but I just couldn't sit by and let another round go, because we're really seeing it in British Columbia. And
I know that the Bank of Canada got back to us today and said that they're not going to comment on this because they're in a blackout period, of course, before they make their decision next week. Why only ask for a pause if this really is having kind of the full human impact that you talk about here with these increases? Why not ask the Bank of Canada to lower rates?
Well, my understanding is what's on the table is the consideration of whether or not to increase rates. And at this stage, I don't even think we've seen the impact, or even a fraction of the impact of the rate increases we've already seen here in BC. I would love to see the Bank of Canada look seriously at the impacts that are taking place, not just in British Columbia, but across the country. I understand from Statistics Canada that the biggest driver of inflation right now in the country is increasing mortgage costs for people. And if you're increasing interest rates, that's only going to lead to higher mortgage costs for people. I don't understand the logic of why this is even on the table. So yes, I would really encourage the bank to have a look at the impacts at a minimum, to take a pause and to find ways to reduce pressure on Canadians.
You know, you say that there are alternatives that the Bank of Canada could look to deal with inflation. What are some of those alternatives in your mind?
Well, I think the bank's got just a limited set of levers that they can pull on, which is why I paired the letter to the Bank of Canada with a letter to the Prime Minister, to say there are some pretty clear things that we can do together to bring down some daily costs that people are facing. We can work in a more tightly integrated way on housing. To bring down housing costs. We're doing a lot of work at the provincial level. The federal government has a lot of programs. When they work together, the impact is much higher, and we can get a lot more done. And also vital infrastructure. This was a focus of the Western premiers. Our ports, our highways, our railways, to get goods moving across the country and bring down the costs of shipping both exports out of the country and imports into the country will help bring down inflation as well. So there are some things that we can do as a provincial and federal government to support the Bank of Canada and bring those costs down. I think just doing all the heavy lifting through interest rates, it's really damaging people and families, young people, seniors. The toll is really growing.
I was just reading the letter that you wrote to the Prime Minister. In one part you say, rather than a scorched earth approach, a targeted approach on key sectors will have a long-term deflationary benefit. So tell me what you think kind of is the scorched earth aspect of the federal government's approach here.
Well, it's really the Bank of Canada having that main lever of interest rates. We can wipe out all the economic activity in British Columbia and prices are going to come down. If people are unemployed, if they can't afford to pay their mortgages or foreclosures, if they are defaulting on their lines of credit and their car loans, prices are going to come down. But is that really how we want to handle inflation in the country? Can't we look at those specific sectors that are driving prices higher for things like groceries through food security initiatives, things like imports by reducing the friction of getting those into the country, increasing the effect of our currency through exports, by improving our ability to get goods to market, by building that housing together, using public land to bring down the costs of housing, federal land, provincial land. These are things we're doing at the provincial level, but we need a strong federal partner to do that, and we can do a very targeted approach to support the Bank of Canada. The scorched earth is really just continuing to increase those interest rates until families literally have nothing left. Right now, families are choosing between housing or no housing. That's the choice, and that's not a choice at all.
One more question on this, and then I want to move to the fire situation. But I understand that you talked to the Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland. Her office put out a statement saying that, both of you committed to working collaboratively. Can you tell me a little bit about how that conversation went?
Yes, it's an important conversation with the Deputy Prime Minister about the critical issue of housing. This is one of the big cost drivers in British Columbia, really soaring rents, increasing costs around mortgages due to interest rates going up, due to the letter I wrote to the Bank of Canada about those central bank policies. And so talking with her about how we can work together, there's a new minister responsible for housing, Minister Fraser. We had a great conversation with him too, but we really need them to understand the urgency of collaborating. They have some good federal programs. We have some good provincial programs. When they work together, the impact is undeniable, and we're just not. And it's just not acceptable given the impact on costs for families and individuals. And so that was my big message. That was the housing minister's big message, and she was very receptive to that. I think we'll be able to make some progress on that.
You talked about scorched earth in your letter there to the Prime Minister. I want to talk about literal scorched earth because, your province right now dealing with just a devastating situation. I understand that the state of emergency has been extended. How are things looking right now as we head into September with the fire situation?
Well, in the south of the province, we've had some rain, which is really good news, and in the interior, which is very welcome. There's some very good firefighting days ahead, I'm advised by our wildfire service, over the next couple of weeks. But in the north, it's still very dry and very warm. We have tens of thousands of people under evacuation alert, which means, at any time they could be notified to leave their homes. We're certainly not out of the woods, to use an appropriate metaphor here. We've got a lot of season ahead of us, especially up north. I also talked to Premier Cochrane from the Northwest Territories today about what she's seeing in her neck of the woods, and it is just awful what they're facing as well. The impacts of climate change are super real out here on the west coast and in the north, and I know that in Quebec and Ontario, Canadians saw those kinds of impacts as well this season, the worst forest fire season in 100 years. As Canadians, I think there's a good opportunity for us all to work together to ensure we have the resources to respond province by province, because my concern is that we're going to see worse seasons going forward, not better. And so the more coordinated we are as a country, the better we'll be able to support each other.
Premier, I know you've got a lot on the go, so appreciate you making some time for us today. That is the Premier of British Columbia, David Eby, joining us from Richmond, BC.